Hello and welcome to another TV Central podcast. I'm Aaron Ryan. This week I thought we would have a general television discussion, and who better to talk television than Tim Burrowes, who's the editor of media website Mumbrella, whose tagline is everything under Australia's media and marketing umbrella. Certainly a site I check out each and every morning. Tim, thanks for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me along.
Lovely. Well, we're actually recording this podcast just hours before The Renovators makes its debut. Pre the block launching this year, I would have predicted this show to be just as huge as MasterChef. It still looks like a hit in the making in terms of production. However, will the audience get into this show while still watching the block, or will they leave the block for The Renovators, or is the new show going to suffer because of the block being on air at the same time?
Look, I tell you what, I would absolutely love to know how much crossover there is from individual audiences. Is it that same hardcore of about a million who flip from channel to channel? Or actually, is it the same million at most channels, and then the cream on top is sort of the 20 or 30% of people who shift in one direction or another? My sense is, and I think you sort of hint at it in the question, is it feels quite similar and quite, close in timings and relatively close in format, particularly as arguably the block has moved its format slightly closer to the Renovators with the sort of warehouse side of things as well. So I think it's a gamble, but the thing is, think back sort of 2 or 3 years and how much of a gamble it felt when they decided that they were going to strip MasterChef in prime time five or six nights a week. That felt like a much bigger gamble, and of course that they pulled that one off.
Mm. Well, with Channel 10's having lots of gambles lately. It's just been a massive year for 10. They had the launch of George Negus, of course, which was a gamble for them. Neighbours moving over to 11. Obviously, the James Warburton saga, the axings, the redundancies. Do you expect all of this will hurt Network 10, or is this the clean out they needed and they should be really focused and ready for 2012?
Yeah, I suppose it all feels like there's this sort of everything's a bit on hold until Warburton actually starts. Actually, funnily enough, I bumped into him a couple of nights ago. I was at the Astra Awards, and he was just sitting in the row in front of me. So I had a little bit of a chat and said hello, because his partner works in subscription television, so he was there as the plus one. So I get the impression he's really kind of enjoying the break and kind of raring to go with sort of once he's allowed to get started. But in the meantime, yeah, it feels like there is a lot of turmoil going on. Now, some of it, I think, is, we've got the goings on just in the advertising market, which, of course, tends seem to suffer more than most when there was that kind of downturn in revenue, which I guess was what did for Grant Blackley, really. So that I think they're still kind of recovering from that fallout to a certain extent. But yeah, I mean, what they need to be is a network that isn't just relying on one show, which, while MasterChef, has done really, really well, that there hasn't been a breakout. There have been some successes. You could probably argue that, 7 p.m. Project has, rates well enough now to be a sort of, slow-burning success. But they do need another, another breakthrough. So, but at the same time, it almost feels to me like they're kind of on hold until James Warburton gets there.
Mm. Well, one of the shows that got given the flick with all of this was Video Hits. They needed to save some money somewhere. Do you think this was the right choice?
I wondered whether this was partly about sending some signals, to the market and maybe even internally as well, that change is coming, change is happening. Because my impression is it wouldn't be hugely expensive in programming terms. So, I kind of, for the dollars it would save, the headlines it got seemed to kind of outstrip it, and they would have known that when they did the decision. So I think that was one of their ways of telling the market. And let's not forget they've also got shareholders who want to feel confident that even if the next results come through and they're not that great, that they're doing something about it. So I wonder whether some of it was was sending the signal, because it's not when you've got a franchise that's kind of well known, it's not always a good idea to get rid of it.
Mm. Well, the other franchise that might be giving the flick, as the rumor is, Sports Tonight. That's been on air for a long time. Do you think that will be missed?
And that would be a real shame. I mean, I think back to when they started messing around with the 10 Years at 5 at the weekend, and they suddenly realised actually the benefits they thought would come through just didn't. And of course, again, it's a powerful little brand within the 10 stable. So that one, getting rid of it altogether would seem like a mistake. What they might, of course, do is downgrade it or move the time slots or all of these things, and somehow keep the name. But unfortunately, with a name like that, they can't easily move it over to 11.
Well, I mean, if you were let's just play CEO for a moment. So if you were forced to make on-air cuts, where would you make them at Network 10?
Yeah, I mean that obviously the question starts obviously with the premise that you have to make cuts, and up to now the strategy for 10 obviously over the years has always been it's been a station which has been run cheaply. It's gone after the sort of the younger demographic, which is advertiser friendly. So it's a nice sort of cheap and cheerful advertising buy. I'm not sure that works. And this is, I think, the big question. I remember someone sort of talking to me must be about three and a half years ago. So, a little while before MasterChef came along to Save 10, and saying that what we were going to see with the launch of the secondary channels was this really big squeeze on 10's audiences. That 10 couldn't just go for the younger audience because you were going to see what eventually became Go and what eventually became 7-2, sort of squeezing from other directions. So, 10 couldn't just go on being what it was, which actually is why they went a bit more after a kind of all-people audience. And, of course, MasterChef was their saving, I suppose. But we're still seeing the squeeze happen. And I'm not sure that, the danger is if you just make cuts, then actually what you do is you're managing decline. But equally, the short answer, which is kind of dodging the question, is I'm not sure there's an easy answer that doesn't just manage decline. I know a couple of people reasonably senior within the industry who've sort of been offered big programming jobs at various networks and turned it down because they just can't see what the future's going to hold and they don't feel that optimistic about it. So I'm not, I'm on, it's a very waffly way of saying I honestly don't know the answer to that.
Well, another one of their big changes, of course, this year was the 90-minute news and George Negus, which are, I guess, doing average. Clearly, 10 would like to pick up some more ratings points before the year is out. Was this the best way going forward for 10, or should have 10 remained a point of difference by showing general entertainment shows against 7 and 9's news shows?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly felt like Negus at 6 didn't work. Then Negus at 6:30 seemed to work a bit better, and the sort of previous sort of, long running of news before that, at least improved ratings overall. And of course, don't forget that they're, by at the same time shifting Neighbours over to 11, what that did was overall their share across the two channels improved. So in revenue terms, it was probably a good move for them. They probably got more advertising revenue than they otherwise would have done. So, I think it was as good a move as any, but, you also get the sense that maybe the commitment's slipping a bit. There are, the drums are beating louder and louder that, the late night repeat of Negus is on the way out and all of those sort of things. So it kind of feels that, that they're not sure how committed they are to it. And of course, this again comes to, what will happen when the new CEO comes in.
That'll be an interesting and another podcast for next year when all of that happens. A couple of quick things for 10 though. Their multi-channel 11 is doing very well, showing lots of new content, a stable schedule, and scripted shows and programming each night. Comparing that with Go's ever-changing schedule, are you enjoying the channel? What do you think of 11?
Yeah, I am, and obviously, they've got a couple of great US content deals as well. That sort of joint venture for 11 is working in terms of delivering the content. So yeah, I suppose what we're seeing Go suffer from to a certain extent is because its fortunes are so linked to 9. and Nine has so sort of struggled in that sort of 7:30 slot to find a stable, schedule there when the likes of, Two and a Half Men have faded, etc. Then that sort of has meant that they've so as not to have the same show running on the two, on Nine and Go at the same time, which often happened in the scheduling. You then seem to see that knock on to Go as well. But yeah, and to me, this is this sort of inter-network battle where they all keep chopping and changing their schedule competitively against each other at the last minute. In the end, it actually feels like they're dragging the whole industry down by doing this. It's a bit like when programs deliberately run late to hang on to the audience. It annoys the audience. They might win the battle that night, but overall it's bad for television because it's just treating the viewers with disrespect.
Mm. Absolutely agree. Look, with the multi-channels on air, 10 has been a lot better playing out shows. They had been a lot better playing out shows of late, and they've been pulling a number of shows off the schedule lately though, and not playing them out. Shows like Undercover Boss USA, Medium, White Collar, Friday Night Lights, Burn Notice, Law and Order, all examples. Plus, I suppose In Plain Sight, Army Wives, Psych, still not back. When they had one channel, perhaps it was hard to reschedule some things immediately, but when they have three channels, is there any excuse for not playing out a show when there is only, half a dozen episodes left?
No, I don't think so. I mean, to me, again, it comes down to this respect for the viewers thing, and of course,
Yeah.
10, looking back a bit longer ago, 10 were never that respectful to things like Outrageous Fortune, of, sort of from over the water as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it comes down to this mindset of winning tonight's battle and being quite sort of short term, rather than the longer term relationship with the viewer. And I particularly as time shifting becomes that much easier as well. For someone who's really dedicated to a show, it doesn't actually matter quite so much now what time it's scheduled or what channel, so long as it's easy to find and predictable where it's going to be. Because most of us have got Foxtel IQ these days that can find it for us.
Totally agree. Look, let's move to 9 now. A disastrous start to the year. The home of comedy ended up being the home of flops. Shit, my dad says live from planet Earth. Two and a Half Men losing steam. Mike and Molly failing. Did 9 misread the audience? Did we want comedy, or were these just poor choices for comedy?
Yeah, that's a really hard one because I remember when they announced Ben Elton, and it seemed like a good idea at the time. And I remember thinking, well, he was great 20 years ago, and I think maybe this was the thing was what it did feel like was that maybe he hadn't evolved. So I think people have said so much about life on planet Earth already. It's probably a bit boring for you and your listeners to spend too much time talking about it, but yeah, to me it was just it was that the show didn't work. So yeah, and this was the problem was the whole strategy was we're going to be about comedy, and of course they weren't to know what was going to happen with with Charlie Sheen. But I do wonder whether the show whether Two and a Half Men would have burnt out anyway. And you do look at Nine's kind of scheduling decisions where look a while back at sort of how Millionaire was a massive hit, and then they just scheduled it so often it burnt out. And then, about 4 years ago, it was all about Gordon Ramsay. And at one point, there were 3 or 4 episodes of Gordon Ramsay a week. And I remember being at a presentation David Gingell did, where he kind of said, well, thank fuck for Gordon Ramsay. And of course, they overused him, and that burnt out. And we've seen it with Two and a Half Men, and you've got to wonder how long Big Bang Theory will hold up for, really, when when that's the new stopgap. It looks like sort of out of the same stable. Obviously, Mike and Molly hasn't really caught. So yeah, the question is, what will be the next option? Will Two and a Half Men kind of come back to life again, come back from the dead? We'll have to see.
Well, look, it wasn't just the comedies though. I mean, they said home of comedy, and that kind of failed. But A lot of other things are failing. Even drama was down. Sea Patrol's final season was a fizzer. Rescue has been flat, although there was a small rise last week. CSIs are nothing near where they used to be. The Mentalist is down. Top Gear was trounced both new and repeat. Getaway was given the flick to Saturday afternoons. So, I mean, is it just a show-by-show failure, or has the Nine Network brand been lost on viewers and they're just not
Yeah.
sticking with Nine?
I mean, different reasons. So, for instance, you mentioned Getaway, and I, I know you've had David Mott on your podcast. I chatted to him, and he used the intriguing phrase "least objectionable programming." So, to sort of paraphrase his view, it's that sort of when there were the three main networks, if the viewers were flicking along and you had the least objectionable show, then they'd probably stick with you and it'd rate. And I wonder whether that was how something like Getaway used to do okay. It was pretty bland and inoffensive. But suddenly in the multi-channel world, then, and there's maybe a dozen choices, even people who haven't got subscription TV, then that sort of program's affected. So I think what we did see was that the more bland shows were the ones that really that really suffered in that environment. But then, you look at something, you mentioned Top Gear, and of course, respect for viewers again. It was a game to try and fool people that they were watching a new episode, they were just gonna run the season in order, all of those things, which were really frustrating for viewers. And of course, particularly I think maybe people who'd sort of grown up with watching it on SBS just objected for the sheer running time. Commercial networks are commercial and they've got to make money and they do that through advertising. But it always felt like there were so many ad breaks jammed into Top Gear and it became such a long program. It became a less pleasurable experience to watch. So I kind of, so you can't point to any one thing. I mean, Rescue Special Ops, I mean, some of it was down to the quality of the shows, but as you say, the last couple of weeks it's kind of been on the way back, where probably mainly just on the back of inheriting a reasonably good audience from the block, but when a show's bad now, readers, viewers rather see through it very quickly. Remember Cops LAC, how quickly that was found out and when, and that was massively promoted. But viewers gave it one chance, and it was pretty dreadful. And they soon went away. So I think a lot of it is just you can't actually treat viewers like fools anymore.
Well, it's not all disaster. Things have turned around with Channel 9 with The Block. This was a very important show for them, giving them great returns and also giving them good lead-ins. The Big Bang Theory, I see, has risen since The Block has been on, and also Hot Properties doing well. Top Design opened well. That's kind of gone down, though.
Yeah,
I
the
mean,
second show was down about 30% or something, I think.
30%. I mean, what do you think of The Block, though, and its fortunes Nine's given them, and also, about Top Design?
Yeah, I mean, Nine must be so relieved that The Block has worked, and it's all come together relatively quickly as well. I was overseas for about 3 weeks covering a advertising festival in another part of the world, and when I got back, it felt like a slightly different, like things had shifted, like it was a slightly different scenario. Nine obviously is still sort of lagging behind Seven, but it feels like they're at least back in the game. Now, I suppose, again, a bit like 10, they're heavily relying on one show for that. So, 10 have got MasterChef, 9 have got The Blog. But, it feels like there's a bit more reason for optimism because, of course, they've got, Underbelly to come shortly as well. So, it wouldn't surprise me if in the second half of the year we see 9 win a few weeks.
The other big show, we talked about The Block, but the other big show coming for 9 this week is Hamish and Andy's Gap Year. Do you think they're the right fit for 9? I mean, they were on the youngest skewing, I suppose, 10 in the past. Will they find a crowd on Thursday nights lodged between Hot Property and the Footy Show?
Yeah, because the question is, of course, what demographic 9 are going after, and the danger being in the sort of in the Footy Show area that it does skew quite male. yeah, this is one that the closer it gets and the more little hints come out, the more that it feels like it could be quite a good show. Whether it's on the right night, I don't know. Um, they kind of made on the Hamish and Andy sort of radio show when they were announcing the time slot and stuff. They made a big kind of thing of involving the listeners in choosing what night it was going to be, which of course was I'm sure a scheduling decision that had already been made by Nine. But and you actually got the feeling that it wasn't their listeners' first choice, but
Mm.
obviously the Hamish and Andy now it's a weekly drive time show on the Southern Cross or Stereo Network is is still massively popular.
Yep.
So there'll be a lot of promotion coming to it from that. You can, I mean, it started already, but you can bet your life in the next few days there'll be massive kind of advertising promotion from Nine, not just on the own network, but kind of on the back. I'm sure you'll be seeing Hamish Andy on the backs of buses and all sorts.
Hmm.
So I think they'll promote it very, very hard. So of course, much like Ben Elton, there will be a level of sampling, but the question is it enough to make people then stick with it? So that like Ben Elton, demonstrated, people will tune in, but the first 15 minutes counts for an awful lot for, and perhaps more so for something which is sort of variety and comedy, which seems is what, the direction that Hamish and Andy are going to go in.
Mm. Hey, look, let's play the we hate doing this sometimes, but let's play the ratings game. What do you think you can give Nine on Thursday night?
Ah, good question. Well, at Mumbrella, we actually play the ratings game every morning. We kind of we pick a show, and then everyone in the team calls out a number for what they predict, and whoever's furthest out has to go and make the first round of tea of the morning. So, so I've become adept at going in the middle of the guesses. So it's a bit harder when I'm the only one guessing. But I reckon I'll shoot for 1.3. I think.
All right, I'll put one
I'm gonna have
point.
to hold you to a guess as well, though.
Yeah, 1.1. I think it's just the slot that it's given. Mainly, not so much just the show. I just don't think nothing's working on Thursday night at all. Even I noticed MasterChef and things like that seem to be down on towards the end of the week on Thursdays and Friday nights. And usually you only have sort of 3 or 4 shows over a million on Thursday. So I don't think that can do anything major. But I guess we'll see.
Yeah, no, you're right. It is a tough slot.
Look, we did touch on this when we spoke about 11 earlier on. Just a bit more chat about that. There's no doubt that Nine's multi-channel and Go is the most frenzy scheduled channel, no doubt. Amendments are made almost daily, and the channel went from a wide range of US import shows and programs to running a bunch of. Basically, they're just running a bunch of movies most nights of the week and endless reruns of Two and a Half Men, The Big Bang Theory, and Top Gear. All of their other shows they had on seemed to be going to 4:30 in the afternoon or midnight, like The Vampire Diaries, Nikita. Um, as the channel lost its identity, or what's the problem? Why are Nine just all over the place with Go?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because the question is, can a network have both their main channel and their two secondary channels all perform on the same night, without too much cannibalising of their own audiences take place? And to kick off with, arguably, Nine and Go were best at it. Seven were a little bit late to the party, probably, particularly with with Mate coming along, and obviously 10 launching 11 was even later still. So, and each time there's been a launch, that's changed changed the dynamic again, I suppose. So, on the one hand, it makes sense, the personality of the channel that launched, in the time it's been launched, the landscape has changed, so it makes sense for that personality to change. But I'm not sure the viewers know what the new personality is, and that's the problem. It's not so much that it's changed, it's that I'm not sure, Nine has a settled view on what the channel is and what it should be for.
Mm. Well, let's flick to. We've spoken about 10 and 9. Let's go to 7. when there's a loser, there generally has to be a winner, and that's been Seven. They've won 20 out of 20 weeks, including all State of Origin weeks. They're in front in all key demos and have had a variety of hits this year. Not all their eggs in one basket. I guess the question is, can Seven do no wrong? And is it the programs that are great, or does having the Seven brand behind the shows make the program a better sell for viewers and then advertisers?
Yeah, I mean, it has been an absolutely brilliant year for Seven. And I wonder with the networks whether actually what tends to happen is their fortunes in the ratings are maybe based on what's gone on behind the scenes over the previous couple of years.
Mm.
And what you kind of saw was, a fair bit of turmoil going on behind the scenes at Nine with, sort of unsettled questions about the ownership and all of that sort of thing. Whereas Seven was steaming along, for a long time, a very stable leadership team. So I think, what we're seeing is them sort of, reaping all, the benefits of everything that kind of David Lackey had put in place. But of course, we've also, seen what might signal the fact that this might be a high watermark for them. In that, this year we've seen James Warburton, who, was seen by many people as well, one of the best media salespeople in Australia, not just for TV, but across all media, letting him go. And of course, it all, in the court case, it all became very clear, just what a horrible mess it was that they ended up letting him go. They didn't want to lose him, and it was handled badly. And at the same time, it drew that picture of, David Leckie kind of, being this kind of sort of garrulous character, but also something of a loose cannon as well. And it sort of raised those questions of, is his time nearly over? And that was kind of what that was the picture the judge drew as much as anything. So I just wonder whether next year we'll see ourselves looking back and saying, okay, well, 2011 was as good as it got for Seven, where everything from several years lined up and went right. And we're seeing tiny little scenes. For instance, until quite recently, Today was running on Nine was running Sunrise very close in the morning. Now, in fact, maybe that crisis is over, although there were still days when they run very, very close. But certainly felt that actually, Sunrise isn't the that morning dominator that it was for Seven. So there are little chinks in the armour. They're absolutely not a spent force, and I wouldn't be surprised if they won next year as well. But I don't think it's a dead cert. Particularly if 10 starts competing a bit more.
Well, you talk about those chinks. The other thing that I noticed interesting with Seven is that they're giving their US slate shows a red hot go, even though they've not been given the chop even though they've been given the chop in America. Like No Ordinary Family started well but faded away. I suppose it's doing well now on Seven Mate. Law and Order LA, probably the biggest flop of the year. Criminal Minds Suspect Behaviours coming up in a couple of weeks, which was not awarded a second season in America. Off the Map was given a 10:30 slot, but even by that standard was a disaster. They tried giving Detroit 187 a go, but that was flicked to 10:30. I suppose the point here is, I mean, is it good giving these shows a go, even though they're flops in America? But I suppose more importantly, we're talking about those chinks in the armor. They've done really, really well, Seven at the start of the year, but now they seem to be running into a bit of trouble. So, what do you think's happening here with Seven at the moment as we go into the second half? I mean, as I said, they're giving all these axed shows a go in prime time.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder whether some of it, is the fact that Seven, started this year as strategically it was the right thing. They threw all of their best stuff at the screen and got a lot of it on air early, and it worked. But but what that has left them is hours and hours of police procedurals to use up. So I think some of it is using it up. Now I wonder whether in the back of their minds is a thought process with some of these shows. Okay, even if they don't hit acceptable primetime ratings, run them a couple of times, get the audience introduced to them, and then even if they move over to 7/2 or 7 May, then you're probably going to take some of that audience across with you. So, some of it could be a bit of a, secondary channels development strategy as well.
Mm.
But it kind of, it's hard to call. Or sometimes you just wonder whether they're running interference. So, for instance, the great battle of Law and Order with 10 running the original franchise and 7 with Law and Order LA on at the same time.
Yep.
Whether that was 7 trying to create interference for 10 or 10 trying to create interference for 7, I'm not quite sure. But certainly that one, obviously, in the end, played to 10's favour.
Mm. Well, I mean, do you think 7? I mean, we're talking about those act shows, but I mean, has 7 hit a snag now with 9 and 10 pushing ahead with MasterChef, Renovators, and the Block? And 7's got a few issues. Monday 9:30, Teen Wolf was moved after one episode. Covert Affairs returning very moderately. Crash Investigation Unit, World's Deadliest Roads are very so-so. Thursday 7:30 just shrinking in numbers with current occupant, the Vicar of Dibley. Then, of course, we talked about the flop of Law and Order LA. Is there reading too much into it? I mean, after all that, they still do have their hits. Downtown Abbey, Great Migrations, Australia's Got Talent, Amazing Race. So, I mean, have they hit a snag, or are they still doing okay?
Yeah, I mean, I do think they're still doing okay. I mean, you point towards Downton Abbey. Giving that big Sunday night slot was probably the right time. Right day of the week. Really great trailers for it as well, though. Really kind of played up the kind of the sex and intrigue rather than the sort of period drama side of it.
Yep.
So I thought they promoted it really, really well. And it wasn't a dead cert. I think that was going to be a massive hit. I know it was huge in the UK, but nonetheless, there's been plenty of stuff that has been big in the UK that hasn't broken here. So that was a good piece of scheduling. But as you say, yeah, Thursdays, what is it? Is it the day they go after a specific demographic, or what is it? But I suppose the hope there is none of the other channels have really cracked it yet either.
Mm. Well, there's still a few other shows to come, and I was just going to get your opinion on them, and if you can give me a hit or miss for each show. Dinner Date Australia with Manu.
Depends on the format. I think with Manu that 7 have obviously decided that he is a character that the audience loves. Obviously he succeeded with Dancing with the Stars and was very good on My Kitchen Rules. But of course, he was also in the first episode of Beat the Star. Was it called Beat the Star?
Yes, that's one. Yep.
Yeah. And that that rated pretty dreadfully. And good on him for taking part. Presumably the contract meant he had to. But he kind of went into it quite sort of gainfully. But it's a bit like 9 have discovered that just because Eddie Maguire's in a show, it's not guaranteed to be a hit. The same with Manu. It's already the case that that just because he's in it, it's not guaranteed to be a hit. So it will need to be a good format as well.
Okay, so reserving that one for seeing how the execution is. 4 Weddings that's going to return for a second season. Will that do okay?
I think it probably will. Yeah, the audience seems to, kind of seems to like Fifi and stuff. So, again, it's on finding the talent and keeping, getting the right stars of the show in terms of, the 4 Weddings. But probably do okay, I would have thought.
US dramas aren't doing so well at the moment. Probably the better one to come out of America in terms of ratings over there was Body of Proof with Dana Delany. Do you think that will do okay?
I honestly don't know anything about that show, actually, so that'll be one that I'll be watching with as much interest as anyone else.
Excellent. Okay, Criminal Minds obviously does well. It's got a spin-off Suspect Behaviour with Forrest Whitaker heading the team. Do you think in Australia the audience will just one week watch Criminal Minds and the next week Suspect Behaviour and just follow on, or?
Well, I mean, the question has now been raised because of how Law and Order did with Law and Order LA, but Forrest Whitaker, massive heavyweight, obviously, so you'd hope he'd bring some sort of gravitas to it.
And the other one, World's Strictest Parents, that's actually been off air for quite a while. I think they do some replays in Sydney and Brisbane on Sunday mornings, but hasn't been on air for new episodes for a while. Do you think that will return to it?
Yeah, I've not detected a big clamour from the viewing public to have that back, so So no, I suspect that they'll use it to fill a hole, but I don't think it'll be a big one for them.
Okay, and finally, two big ones for Channel 7 returning. Do you think the X Factor will fire second time round?
Yeah, I think it probably will, won't it? It did well enough the first time. I think it surprised a few people on, how well it did. It didn't quite make that chatting about it in the office the next morning status, but yeah, it did well enough, I think. So yeah, I think there's probably life for at least one more series.
And finally, the big new Australian drama Bush Ranger series Wild Boys for Channel 7.
Yeah, this one you'd have to have really big hopes for. The idea of it says something about Australia and Australian culture, and I think probably it will almost play well that Underbelly would have probably gone to air first and kind of given people a bit of a kind of taste for sort of Australian history drama. So yeah I I reckon that one will probably do quite well.
Mm. And of course, they've got Back to the Rafters, which will also be back, and there's no reason that shouldn't remain a hit. Well, that pretty much wraps up each of the commercial networks. But before we leave this podcast, I want to get a bit of personal for a moment and ask you a few questions about yourself. Your
Yeah, sure.
humble beginnings. Tell us about your journey from school to end up working in the media.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that many people manage it now, but I was lucky enough that I've been a journalist since I was 18. So I kind of, was in the UK, was lucky enough to find a kind of, low-paid junior trainee position on a local newspaper. And I sort of went the newspaper's route for a long time. So sort of, local and daily papers. And then eventually kind of, many journalists at some point sort of end up specialising. And, my first specialisation was actually writing about doctors. So I, worked for 6 or 7 years kind of, writing about the National Health Service in the UK. Eventually became the editor of a publication called Hospital Doctor. But one of the things about journalists is, one day you're writing about that, and then the next day you jump across. So I guess my sort of break into writing about media was, which I'd always wanted to do, and sort of gone for a couple of previous interviews with the same company, was I was fortunate enough to persuade the bosses of Media Week that the editing skills I'd built up on Hospital Doctor, kind of writing about well-paid, arrogant, opinionated people, would also work writing about media, writing about you can finish the punchline yourself. But yeah, so I literally went one day from editor of Hospital Doctor to editor of Media Week in the UK. So that was sort of my first adventure writing about this world. And in the UK, the main focus of Media Week was kind of on the media agencies and that side of it, like the business side of media. But yeah, then I ended up moving to the Middle East to launch the Middle East franchise of a magazine called Campaign that writes about advertising and media. So that was sort of based in Dubai, but covering the markets in Saudi Arabia and Lebanon as well. And then from the thing that brought me to Australia was the editorship of B&T magazine, which is a magazine for the advertising industry. And that took me up to about 2 years ago when I launched Umbrella.
So tell us about Umbrella, how that was actually conceived.
Yeah, I mean, like most pieces of sort of, I think we've become reasonably commercially successful now, but how we've ended up wasn't what the plan was initially. Our thought was that actually the market was pretty well covered for titles about the advertising and media industry, and there wouldn't be room for another. So we wouldn't just be taking on established titles like Ad News and B&T, but we'd launch a series of really niche titles, something that just focused on advertising agencies, something that just focused on people working in PR or journalists or TV networks, and we'd do a series of these, and these would probably be PDFs that would go out once a fortnight was the plan, and then we'd need somewhere that we'd put all this content afterwards. So we kind of thought, okay, well look, this will be the Umbrella brand, and we'll just chuck something up on WordPress. and that was Mumbrella. Unfortunately, that took off. So the terrible idea of the fortnightly PDFs never happened.
Mm. For people that are not totally aware of what you do, tell us about the site, exactly what it is. I mean, you talked about it being for PR people and advertising and stuff like that. What is if someone was to go onto the site, what would they expect?
Yeah, so Umbrella, I mean, really is the idea is a conversation about for anyone who works or is interested in the communications industry. So that's anything from people involved in making content, you know, whether it's TV or whatever, through to the guys who buy and sell it, so people working in ad sales, people working in media agencies, through to people working in PR, through to journalists. So the idea being there's some sort of conversation going on that's relevant to, you know, anyone working broadly in that industry. And then it's a mixture of news pieces, opinion pieces, and kind of, you know, the more lighter sort of diary pieces. And we back it up with a fair bit of video as well.
Mm. Well, you've been going on the road lately. I've noticed on the site with the conferences, Umbrella 360. Tell me about them and how they've been received.
Yeah, so Umbrella 360, that was our first big conference. So we've done sort of, you know, the occasional kind of breakfast with maybe, you know, sort of 4 speakers kind of in various sort of cities around Australia. But this was a 2-day event, so we did it in Sydney. There were about in the end about 800 people there, and the idea was that we just, you know, I guess replicated what we do on the site. You know, a series over the 2 days, 4 streams. You know, just big conversation. You know, trying to have some really interesting conversations about the big issues. One of the streams kind of focused on the screen industry, actually, so sort of TV and film. So, you know, we kind of, you know, for instance, one of the most popular sessions actually was the one talking about the rise of the rise of Twitter in the planning of TV shows. You know, how it's actually making an impact in how TV shows are made and watched. But yeah, you know, we were delighted with the support we got for what was our first main event.
Mm. And is that going to be continuing in the future? From that success, will you be doing them again next
Yes,
year?
yeah, it will. We'll definitely, Umbrella 360 will definitely become an annual event. We're also hoping to gear up what we do on the training side of the industry. So, you know, sort of, you know, different kind of, you know, half-day and one-day training events, and more sort of smaller events. So I think the next thing we'll be doing is a film night for viewers, which is when Morgan Spurlock comes over to promote his film, which is about product placement, and mainly in film, but also in TV. We'll be doing a Q&A with him for some of our, you know, some of the Umbrella readers. So that's coming up in the next few days, actually.
Look, during this podcast, I just had a thought that I'd put to you. I noticed, obviously, with the commercial networks, obviously there's competition between them. With the newspapers, there's competition between them. Radio, obviously the same. But I noticed when you have media, I suppose media writers, particularly online media writers, that there is more of a sense of that they're kind of all in this together. Because I noticed with things like for Media Week in Australia, when they do their podcast, they'll invite, you know, David Knox from TV Tonight, or someone from The Age, and someone from the Sydney Morning Herald. And, you know, I've gone back and forth chatting with people like David Knox at TV Tonight, and I'm happy to have you on this podcast, even though I do a media website, obviously 2 different websites. But, I mean, have you noticed that people that are like a writing in the media seem to be a lot more sort of together, as opposed to how it is with newspapers and radio and television?
Yes, to a certain extent, I agree, particularly in the online sector. So for, you know, and you know, I'd probably add Crikey into the list of examples
Of course,
you come
yep.
up with as well, who sort of, you know, write a fair bit about media. You know, but you know, in other ways. So for instance, you know, our main source of revenue is still advertising, and when it comes to that, we're competing with the likes of Ad News and B&T, you know, who are sort of established print products as well. And, you know, our salespeople, for instance, would compete very bitterly with their salespeople. You know, they'd work very, very hard to get the deal, to show that, you know, our outlet's better than their outlet, or, you know, more cost efficient to reach the sort of people that the advertisers want to reach, or whatever it is. But at the same time, there's a kind of level of good-humoured banter amongst the amongst the journalists, among the editors. You want to get the story first, and you want to tease them that you did get it first. But at the same time, we see each other 2 or 3 times a week at events sometimes. So you actually tend to see more of your peers and your competitors than you do anyone else in the industry, because of course it's a revolving cast at these events where the only people who end up going to the same things are sometimes the trade journos. So so from that point of view, you have to get along because you see so much of each other.
Yeah. I suppose just last question. You're about to start a new week. So what do you look at covering this week? What's happening with the site this week?
Oh gosh, what's coming up this week? Actually, one thing to look out for. What day of the week does your podcast usually go live?
Would probably be on Monday or Tuesday.
On Monday,
so
okay. I think on Wednesday, so I probably can't quite say yet. But we have we shot what we think is a big video interview with a big radio personality, which is going to go up on probably on Wednesday, and I think that's going to generate some conversation, but I don't think I can quite yet say who it is, unfortunately.
No worries. Well, I suppose that pretty much wraps things up. Thanks for being on the podcast. Thanks for also having a chat about yourself, and I hope to chat again soon. So thank you very
My
much.
pleasure. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
All right, Tim Burrowes, editor of the website Mumbrella, which can be located at www.mumbrella.com.au for all things media and marketing under one umbrella. That is it for this podcast. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to bringing you another one real soon. Until then, I'm Aaron Ryan for tvcentral.com.au. See you then.